Well, let's just kind of get started and really happy to have Natalie here today. Really excited. It's a great way to wrap up the week, and you've had quite the week.
Yes, I have. I launched this book, The Creativity Leap, and you were part of some early conversations around that, Gary. Different ways I've been exploring these ideas of wonder and rigor and my 3I framework. But yeah, today was a really fun week launching a new book in the middle of a global health pandemic.
I'm sure that's exactly what you were thinking about when you sat down to write it originally.
Exactly. I was actually thinking last night that this time last year, last June, coming up to the 4th of July, I had a bit more of a miserable 4th of July because I had to carve out time to write. So the book wasn't even written this time last year.
That's even crazy to think about it. But as Natalie said to you, we've had some conversations and we've known each other for a little while now. And just in casual conversations, hearing the momentum around the book starting to come together. And then I think, honestly, you kind of sequestered yourself and went into the writing mode. And there were times where I thought, geez, I wonder what Natalie's up to. And I know what you're up to. But it's exciting to see a lot of what were just almost just table talk conversations now become a part of the book that so many people now are getting a chance to get close to and find their place in. So just really, I guess it's a great place to start with congratulations on the launch, but also everything that is going to be ahead. We've had a chance just prior to kicking this off, just this week in some of the conversations and the people that you're meeting. And I think anytime you put something, creative out into the world, just to see how people react and how much it resonates with them is reward that maybe you didn't even really count on. And maybe that's just a great way to kind of get into it. It's only been a couple of days since it's been out, but what's some of the reactions and some of the conversations you've had with people over, what the past couple of days? I'd love to, while it's fresh in your mind, what was exciting, maybe surprising of this of what you're hearing?
Well, thank you, Gary. Thank you very much for your encouragement, your support. I really appreciate that. And thank you to 29 for sharing the platform to have this conversation. This morning I was going through a lot of emails, and one that I got this morning was a woman from San Francisco who listened in on my conversation with Seth Godin, who, as many of your listeners and viewers will know, is pretty iconic in this space of marketing and innovation. Like one of his pivotal books was Tribes. He's a great book called Dip and lots of others, and he's a huge following. So he shared his platform, and yesterday we kind of culminated the book launch week talking about the creativity leap. And a woman, one of the emails I got this morning, this woman, she said, I had goosebumps, and I didn't want the conversation to end. So that's high praise that, the conversation was really touching people on this visceral level. But I started out the official book launch day was this past Tuesday, June 23rd. And even before that, I have been inviting contributors. I interviewed over 50 people for this book, as well as endorsers, to share their takes on creativity. On my YouTube channel, which I hope a lot of people will start to subscribe to from your community, I share a lot of content, and I've been doing these Creativity Leap chats. And maybe we can even share this later on that channel. Sure. But it was a way just to start the momentum. But officially, it started with a conversation with John Maeda last Tuesday. Last Wednesday, a week before the actual book launch happened. John Maeda is the author of The Rules of Simplicity. He's now the Chief Experience Officer at Publicis Sapient. And he is, for me, this guru at the intersection of tech and design. So he shared his platform, and we did a really cool LinkedIn live conversation. Then on Tuesday, the actual day of the book launch, I started out with morning coffee, just totally taking advantage of all these virtual platforms, and did a Facebook Live with Galit Ariel, who is an Israeli woman living and working in Toronto. She's an augmented reality expert. She calls herself a digital hippie. There's another, she calls herself, I think, also a practical optimist. I think there's a lot of fun ways she talks about her point of view. Lunchtime was with Faye Wu, who is a digital marketing expert, and Faye actually produced my speaker reel. So it was nice to like come together with her in that way around the book. She interviewed me about the book. And then we did cocktails with the global DJ King Britt. And King is from Philly, like me, and we've known each other for decades now. And King is now a professor of electronic music at UC San Diego, and he still does DJing, all sorts of cool events. He's been an Emmy, I don't know if he was Emmy nominated, I won't say that, I might be misspeaking, but he's produced work for The Roots, Jill Scott. He's worked with a lot of really heavy hitters in the music industry. So we did a cocktails conversation on Instagram Live. So those are the ways I've been, and then of course yesterday was Seth Godin on his platform. So those are the ways I've been sharing out the ideas, and it's been a joy. Let's just say my original plan for a book launch before COVID was to have an in-person party on the rooftop of the Free Library of Philadelphia here in Philly, which would have been fun on a summer warm.
Yeah, I hope we can still do that sometime.
Yeah, maybe we can still do that. But this way, actually, it was a broader reach.
That's really exciting. And full disclosure, we've now been doing, which we'll talk about in a second, the webinar series around purpose for several months now when things started to change. And we were going to schedule Natalie on a date, and we thought, the book's coming out that week. Let's do it Friday. Just to sort of capture some of that momentum of all that you're doing and creativity is, as it always is, but even more so this week, is really front and center, which would be a great merging of the two, thought patterns a little bit of creativity and this idea of the Purpose First webinar series. And just a quick background on that is really a series of conversations with people who really put purpose first in what they do. And it was really an eclectic group of people. And we talked about things like resiliency and empathy. And personally, I was really looking forward to today because we're going to talk about creativity and innovation, which is something I think, the whole progression of everything since February and March now, it seems people are rising up and going, okay, it's not going away, but we still have to find a way to find our place in it and start to move forward. And for me, creativity and invention is such a big part of it. I was really looking forward to what we're going to do. So that's why we really we're excited about the idea of really how creativity really fuels purpose in life and work. So we're going to hit on a couple things, but for people who have joined us, we're going to talk a little bit about the idea of purpose, and then we're going to really jump into a couple of the topics, at least for us, that really jumped out. And I highly recommend you guys and even telling others to pick up the Creative Leap, and just because I have my copy here. So.
Oh, thank you, Gary.
Yeah. That's why I grab it, because I want to get the subtitle correct too. And it is the Creativity Leap, but it is about unleashing curiosity, improvisation, and intuition at work, which, I mean, that's something for everyone right now, regardless of what you do. So I recommend do pick it up and work your way through it on your own journey and find out what you could use. But that's how the two of us and have come together. This is different. We haven't done this before. Anyone who's watching is an opportunity to get a couple cool things, which is if you text CREATE to 33777, as you see here, you'll get some a sample of Creative Leap, but also there's a chance to win. And I won't read it, you have it in front of you. But if you can share something you get from the next bunch of minutes, in terms of maybe it's a doodle, maybe it's a quote, some inspiration. But if you do that, and you could tag both Natalie and 29 on LinkedIn, there's a chance to get a free signed copy.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I love that you guys also added a doodle, because you and I, Gary, you especially are an amazing visual diagrammer and doodler, and I am a devotee, and I try to practice a little bit I won't, I can't, I honestly, I'm not doing it every single day,
Yeah.
but as much as possible, I annotate through doodles. I mean, it's so important to activate that part of our minds through doodling. So thank you for having people share in that way. I love that.
Yeah. So if you're here, and there will be replays, and I think we're going to have it available for there it is, next week, but it'll be live for a while. Is take a chance to jump in, and again, if something inspires you, and there's going to be a lot to consider, because we're going to try to cover as much as we can in the time we've allotted. But there it is. Because we want this to be interactive, and we want you guys to sort of react to what you're hearing, and also in terms of a little housekeeping. We're going to devote a little time towards the end for some questions. So feel free to use the opportunity and put a question in the box, and we'll address it when we can. But we just love to know what you're responding to. And it's a great, as busy as Natalie's been, we have her now for a little while. Use the opportunity to put a question out there. So now that you guys know that, we're gonna kind of just jump in. So. Moving on. A little bit, I kind of teased it already, but just to ground this in this, 6 weeks or more, we've been all about really the power of purpose as a catalyst for positive change. And originally it was about our clients and businesses per se, because there's so much going on, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as well. But quickly to really look at a catalyst for positive change, maybe in your business, maybe in your career, but also just personally. I mean, I think we all could use a good amount of that. So we're going to touch on that, and maybe you can inspire a couple questions out there. So moving on, I want to put this out there and maybe ask you, Natalie, just to get your take on this. Is when we first started to do this, we just wanted, as you say, a platform to start some conversations. And as the weeks turned into months, we started to really understand that the world, I don't know if it's suddenly, but the world suddenly is becoming more mindful of what is meaningful. Mm-hmm. Because, when you have these sort of feet to the fire moments, it really it forces you to make some decisions on what do you care about, what is important, and try to rally and create some action around it. So, I mean, just to use this as a little framing device, what are your thoughts on what this is suggesting?
So that statement, the world is more mindful of what is meaningful, brings to mind for me an article that I read in Harvard Business Review back in March. The name of the article was, I forget, that sensation you're feeling is called grief, or it was something along the lines of that. And it was an interview with one of the world's leading foremost thought leaders on the topic of grief. His name is David Kessler. And exactly, yeah. So the sixth stage of grief, he contributes this idea. The sixth stage of grief is actually meaning. So when I see that slide about, it seems like the world is conspiring to converge to really start caring about meaning. The reason why that's so relevant and impactful to me is that creativity is about the business of meaning making. Creativity is how we go about forging purpose on a personal level in order to connect in our tribes, which are a subset of community. And it actually makes sense that we all are trying to forge meaning in the wake of a global health pandemic, in the wake in the United States of the acknowledgement of systemic racism and all the social justice protests. And I love that David Kessler framed it in that way, because it nicely means that through this time of trauma, because it's this trauma on various levels, we're not ending on a low note of just like, okay, acceptance, which has traditionally been the fifth stage of grief, but it's like ending on an uptick. Okay, yeah, we accept that this is a new normal. How do we make sense of this in a way that drives value, not just financial value, not only financial value, but social value, cultural value, personal value in our lives? So I see this kind of nice Venn diagram between meaning and creativity and a chaotic, ambiguous world. Creativity is all in that.
Let me ask you a question, because it actually was a question among some of the team members as we were leading up to today. And I love this point of really the sixth stage of grief is that meaning, because it is trying to identify our why. We hear a lot about, the why, which opens the door to creativity, which was really exciting. But the question I'm going to ask, and love to get your take on it, is how do people who wouldn't normally consider themselves being creative embrace creativity?
Well, hopefully they'll read my book, The Creativity Leap, and they will start to get to what I had hoped my dream. And Seth Godin very nicely said that he thought I had achieved that, was to really democratize how we've been thinking about creativity. Nice. In my view, we have kind of ghettoized creativity in the arts, and that's not fair to artists, and it's not beneficial to our society at large. And from my perspective, we are all hardwired to be creative, but for a lot of different reasons, that creativity gets drummed out of us. So the way that I came up with defining creativity through my research is that creativity is our ability and capacity to toggle between wonder and rigor to solve problems. So if you think about any creative pursuit, your own creative capacity being about wonder and rigor, well, we all have a capacity to find more wonder in our lives, as well as to practice more rigor. And the reason it was important for me to have a definition that was simple, wonder and rigor, in order to solve problems, that's how I'm defining creativity. It was also important for me to emphasize that, to demystify creativity. It's not, you're not struck by some magical lightning from a magical muse, and there's only a select few who can be creative, right? It takes you to set aside time for wonder, which is awe and audacity and pausing and being really big blue sky in the types of questions you ask, asking really different types of what if questions. Mm-hmm. And it requires the unsexy stuff of discipline, incessant practice, time on task. It's often very solitary. It's not, I have a background. Let's go back to creativity in the arts. Mm-hmm. Although, incredible scientists, attorneys, plumbers are incredibly creative. But let's go back to the arts. I studied dance for many, many years. And it's always, if you study dance or any other art form, you're so aware of the grind and the sweat equity that's involved before you get to that moment of the gallery opening or the performance on stage that seems so svelte and put together and pristine and pretty or provocative or mysterious, right? There is a lot of grunginess involved, especially in dance. It's funny, female dancers in particular are seen on stage as being so feminine and graceful and kind of like the biggest tomboys ever. I mean, you kind of have to be rolling around on the floor and stretching your muscles to an unquestionable, acreable amount. But yeah, so creativity is this toggling, and that verb toggle was also important because of, I'm always going to mispronounce his name. Maybe Gary. But flow.
That's a very long, yes.
Yeah, yes. Mihaly. When I read the audio version of the book, I had to keep replaying on Google Audio how to say his name, so I wouldn't.
I'll need that. Yeah.
But anyway, that's how I'm defining creativity.
Yeah, and it's funny you brought that up, because I love any word that kind of comes out of nowhere, it seems, but is grounded in great meaning. And when we first started to talk about this, I love toggling. I mean, everyone knows in terms of gaming and what that is, but how does someone who's maybe for the first time in a while embracing creativity and understanding that there is that balance or equilibrium, but how best would someone toggle? So what does toggling look like?
Yeah, thank you for bringing us back to that question. So it actually, great leaps start with smaller incremental steps. So it's not a huge dramatic shift and change, but it's actually making a commitment and a decision to starting to integrate, fold in, like you're baking a cake. If you're baking a cake, you fold in the flour little by little, right? You're folding it in to your life. So an example of a way to build in more wonder into your life is to take daydream breaks, which is something that I actually do. So it's actually setting with a timer. I actually took one this morning already. In the warm weather, we can sit outside. I'm from Philly, so we have stoop culture. So you sit outside on the front steps. But if it's cold out, you can just sit by a window and stare at the clouds. And we now know the neuroscience of creativity. Our brains need an opportunity for the neurosynapses to rewire on the lateral and deeper regions of our brain, and not just be focused on the frontal region, in order for great ideas to marinate. So daydreaming more. Another way is to, what I like to say, become a clumsy student of something. Because when we are a student, we actually will be able to practice wonder and rigor. Now, it doesn't have to be that you go out and you take a class. You could just start working on a hobby, and maybe you're teaching yourself through YouTube lessons. But there's something about the process of tinkering, of play, of playing around, that ignites that wonder. And it also requires us to have that rigor. In my life, I'm a clumsy student now of the foxtrot and the tango. And the tango is a really hard dance because it's so intuitive also. But being in that student mode where you have that fresh eyes perspective, you'll ask very different questions, you'll improvise more, and you will rely on your intuition a lot more. Those are two examples of ways you can start on a personal level to start practicing that creativity that will transfer into your work.
Nice. And it makes me think of something, and I want to ask, and for people who may not know, is in addition to author and global speaker, Natalie has her own company, which is Figure Eight Thinking, that works with clients and trying to embrace creativity in their business. So I'm going to bridge or toggle perhaps business and clients, and it's we both have clients we speak to on a regular basis and trying to introduce a more creative approach. And when you were talking, the daydreaming and creating your own space to do this, from personal level, you can control that. But I'd love to hear some of your experiences, I don't know, over the past couple months on the acceptance of being creative and opening your mind up to greater creativity from a business, a team, a brand sense at a time when most people are concerned with just survival.
Yeah.
How do you bridge that?
Well, it's something that I've been calling the value of the pause. And, some sectors in our society are doing really well. A lot of companies in the tech sector are humming, they're doing just fine. And we know that in other sectors like food and bev and the restaurant industry, it's higher education really disrupted. People are experiencing layoffs and furloughs. So what I really try to emphasize is that creativity is not a luxury. Creativity is not some frilly woo-woo add-on. Nice, it's actually a productivity play. And what I mean by that is we are in the midst of something called the fourth industrial revolution. The train has left the station. It's not a scenario where the robots are taking over, but it is a scenario where technology is ubiquitous. We have augmented reality. If you have an Alexa, I'm whispering that because there's one in my office and it will start to go off. Anytime we need to know the definition of something, we Google it. That's artificial intelligence and algorithms, right? But the algorithm will still need to be initiated and designed by a human being who can ask a better question, right? So the beginning and end of the algorithm still requires what I call the 3 I's. The 3 I's is this framework I created to help explain, okay, so we have wonder and rigor. How do we exercise it and practice it? Well, we exercise and practice creativity through the 3 I's, which are inquiry, curiosity. An algorithm needs someone who will ask a better and different question. Improvisation, which is not about being a phenomenal jazz musician or doing whatever you feel like or being a stand-up comic on or improviser on Saturday Night Live. Improvisation fundamentally means to be adaptive. It means you're firmly rooted in the present. You're all about yes, and you're not anticipating what's going to happen or what someone's going to say next, but it's all about the build. It's about being very experimental and converting mistakes into opportunities. And the way that shows up in organizations is to have a much more experimental work culture, which starts from leadership. And leaders, not just at the top of the organization, but also emergent leaders. This fundamentally is a culture change, is a CY change, because most people work in organizations where even if the leadership says, oh, embrace failure, we value mistakes, right? There's fear that it'll be punitive, right? So leaders from the margins, and how can you really encourage people to embrace mistakes and build on mistakes? You show it by example. You're not punitive if something goes wrong after you've announced that you want people to behave more in that way. But you also got to give some runway for that, right? And runway comes in the form of resources like time, like compensation, and like review and promotion. So if you really value these things, you'll start to build it into the ways that you're evaluating, that you're hiring. And it will not happen overnight, but prototype it in small areas of your organization. So the three I's were inquiry or curiosity, improvisation. The last one is intuition. And intuition is something that I suspected was key in leadership, but up until the past year, I've been really shy about bringing up intuition to, executives and corporations. Sure. But it turns out that the most successful leaders absolutely rely on their intuition, which I call a type of pattern recognition, in order to make decisions. So for example, I interviewed the CEO of Vectorworks, Biplab Sarkar, who is a PhD in engineering. And I thought, oh boy, when I bring up intuition to this gentleman, how's he going to respond? He totally embraced the role of intuition as an engineer, as a CEO in making decisions. So intuition is this thing that is this muscle. Seth Godin and I were talking about this yesterday, and it's something that we have to exercise. So to start incorporating this in an organization takes time, it takes leading by example, and we have to actually demonstrate through incentivization that we are encouraging our colleagues to start incorporating creativity and amplifying creativity.
And I really do love that because, and you mentioned it earlier, it requires that behavioral change, a mind shift. And you probably have experienced this as well, is that well-intended clients who, and when we both work in that area of design thinking, it gets people excited. And I don't know, maybe you've had this, but the minute you mention one of the tenets of it, like, hey, fail fast, that will scare people from a room.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So I love the fact that it incremental and love the idea of the prototyping of it's not a leap of action, it's just a leap of focus, and maybe changing the way you look at things. So I really do love that. We have in front of us the idea of CQ, and I loved it. It's in the book, and for those interested, to seek that out, because we've heard, we all know IQ, and then we've heard about EQ. Can you give us a little foundation of CQ and how might we get in touch with our own?
Right. Yeah. So creativity quotient, or CQ, is something that can increase over time. It's something that actually increases by exercising those three I's. So the inquiry piece, I was a professor for 16 years, as you know, Gary, and there was always this moment in a classroom environment where I would ask, so are there any questions? And there would just be silence, right? And I grew to expect it, unfortunately, because what's happened is that we have started equating curiosity with ignorance, and ignorance is something bad. And of course you're ignorant about something, you don't know the answer to it, but we shouldn't squash questions, right? I learned so much by reading the work of Warren Berger that asking questions is a way of thinking. you can tell so much about a person by the quality of the questions that they ask. So one way to increase our creativity quotient is to start leading with questions. And what Warren Berger discovered when he was trying to understand, well, what makes the most innovative companies so innovative? He found in his research that they lead with questions. They start out by asking why, like just really challenging their own assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
Then they diverge even further and ask, well, what if we started hiring people who only had a high school diploma and didn't come from these fancy schools? Or what if we started hiring people who are 50 years old and older, not under 40, right? Et cetera. So like, what if? And then you start to converge into asking how, right? So asking questions is one way, and leading with questions is one way to increase CQ. Another way is to be more improvisational. And in fact, this is not so far out of reach. None of us gets to work from a script, right? Every day we wake up and we've got to figure it out. We kind of have this loose structure. And by the way, that's exactly what improvisation needs. Improvisation is not doing whatever you feel like. It requires loose, fluid structures and for us to be adaptive. And what I see, unfortunately, in a lot of corporate culture is that there is this fear of moving away from the rule book, moving away from the script, right? So instead of a rule book, we've got to make a leap to a playbook, which is a bit more, allows us to be a bit more adaptive. And then finally, really listening to your intuition. There's a reason why all of us have something called the vagus nerve that's embedded in our bodies. It's a nerve that starts in our cranium. It goes through our heart and down into our gut. So we literally are wired to have this kind of internal antenna between mind, heart, and gut. So there's a reason why we will say things like, my gut is telling me, or thinking on my feet, or feeling like, right? We have all these words that are actually speaking to a physiological reality. So pay attention to that intuition. It's there for a reason. Don't ignore it.
I love those. I think we might have foreshadowed where we were going. Just to move on, if we could, I think it's the next slide. We can get back to that because I want to spend a little bit, because we also have had a good number of conversations about Warren Berger and questions. We'll touch on that in a minute, but that's your baby right there. That's for everyone who hasn't seen it. That is it. I would love, and I think you've touched on some of it, but would love to hear more about why you felt it, even prior, obviously, to what's going on right now, but just the need to put this out there, and why did you feel compelled? Because everyone knows that it's not easy, and the commitment of book writing. Why did you feel I have to do this?
I felt that I had to do this for two major reasons. One was this creeping sensation that there's a lot of innovation churn happening in organizations and companies. Some of our colleagues, Gary, call it innovation theater. I tend to call it innovation churn. We're just kind of treading water. And in my view, we're kind of talking over and around each other. We're not actually sure we mean the same thing by innovation. And I concluded that we actually have to pause, take a step back, and start with creativity. I define innovation as invention converted into value, right? You could have an invention, but until you convert it into financial value, cultural value, social capital, all that, it's not an innovation. Right. And then we take a step back even further. The engine for innovation is creativity. So the primary reason I wanted to write this book was to give a guide that would be inspiring and also include practical tips and advice about how individuals and organizations could start to truly innovate by making these creativity leaps. The second reason was just kind of on a practical reason in my own business. I do, as you mentioned, I do a lot of speaking. I love keynote speaking, and I'm even in the midst of the pandemic, I'm still doing quite a bit, which I'm enjoying. And I'll say this started happening 3 years ago. A lot of the way I use speaking, every time I speak, I try something new. I try a new idea. I do a variation of the theme. Yeah. And it's a way for me to prototype my ideas through my public speaking. and I would start to get questions from people coming up to me after the talks from the audience saying, this was cool. Where can I read more about this? Now I blog for Inc. and that's one place, but I quickly realized, gosh, I don't have a one-stop area repository for all these ideas that buzz around in my head, where I can now say, here you go, read this book, buy this book, and this is where it's all in one place. So those were the two major reasons I had for writing a book. It was to make a contribution to how we were thinking about innovation, and maybe even a third reason is kind of a call to action. Your whole series is about purpose, and I have said kind of facetiously that we've all been showing up to work in drag. We
more.
Well, we don't really get to show up as our true human selves. It's like Natalie's greatest hits, the best of. And there's not a lot about me personally that you are unaware of, which actually might move the needle in a project if you invited me to use more of my goofy sense of humor or my love of dance or the fact that I'm an African-American woman of a certain age and all those things and elements about my personality, my character that could contribute to a process. In our organizations are organisms. They're made up of humans, right? So that was another reason, was just to help. Erica Keswin wrote a nice endorsement for the book, and she wrote, her book is called Bring Your Human to Work. And she talks a lot about this, about how we need to do that a lot more. So that was another reason.
All good reasons. I want to push on if we can, and just to look at time. I love this, and we had talked about this before, and on a couple different occasions, and I read it recently, is the studies that get done. And slowly we've seen creativity as a skill climb the ranks. And I think most recently it was third. And now creativity as a number one job skill in the world is a pretty bold statement. Can you speak to a little bit of what this means and how people could leverage this?
Yes, as a creativity strategist, I'm advising leaders on how they can apply creativity and foresight in order to get to more transformative business results. I see a direct, bold line between creativity and business ROI. It's not a fuzzy dotted line. And one of the things I do in my work is I collect signals on the landscape. That's a lot of the work that comes from my background in fashion, in anthropology, in foresight. And 5 years ago, the World Economic Forum declared that creativity would be, so in 2015, they said, creativity is going to be the number 10 of the top 10 job skills by 2020. That's what they said in 2015. 1 year later, they said creativity is going to be the number 3 of all the top 10 job skills in the world. And what was fascinating is that job skills number 1 and 2 were critical thinking and problem solving, which PS is all part of creativity. So which is why I'm saying that creativity is the number 1 job skill in the world. And when we're looking at basic tasks being taken over in automation in healthcare, in financial services, in manufacturing, it's going to be what we sadly call soft skills. And I'm saying sadly because we tend not to, in our culture, we tend not to appreciate the feminine, the soft side. So it's kind of like secondary. We call something a soft skill. But I have a slide in a lot of my presentations where I'll say soft skills are hardcore. And soft skills are things like empathy, curiosity, collaboration, critical thinking, communication, active listening, these activity, right? So this is, as tasks are going to be taken over by computers and technology and robots, creativity will be the essential way that we can distinguish ourselves in a marketplace saturated with the Alexas of the world.
Yeah, and I would love to hear, because I think you might have used this before, and it ties into this conversation right now really well, is the idea of if it's some human's creativity that drives the algorithm.
Yes.
and the rise of AI. Everyone is like, oh no, the rise of AI. But I think that distinction to say, wait a second, it's still, there's a reason creativity is going to be the number one valued. Tell us a little bit about that, because I just found it not just exciting, but encouraging for people that are thinking, oh no more creativity.
No. Well, right. In order to figure out how the next algorithm, a human being, a team of humans, of people, hopefully cognitively diverse teams, will still have to ask a different and better question. And what does that require? That requires empathy, that requires curiosity, that requires that we integrate qualitative research in addition to the quantitative. I always say the quantitative research gives us the bird's eye view of society, and qualitative gives us the worm's eye view of society. We need both.
Yeah.
So I first got hip to this reality that an algorithm is still going to need a human being at either end who asks a different question, from Shelley Palmer. Shelley Palmer is a musician. He's a tech consultant. And I read a great interview with him in a PricewaterhouseCoopers magazine where he was pointing that out. And I was like, right on. That's exactly, as you said, the type of encouragement that we need. That also means we've got to start educating very differently.
Right.
We can't educate to a test. We have to educate people who will fall in love with the process, not just the solution.
I love that. I want to just pause for a second and ask if there are some questions, because I just checked and the time is kind of whipping past, and I still want to touch on a couple topics. But if you have questions and you want Natalie to respond to it, now would be a great time to post those questions. Just add them into the comment box and we'll get to them. But while you're doing that, I just want to move forward with the next, because I want to stay true to our time. And we talked about the interplay of wonder and rigor, and I want to kind of just for time and all, but also mention that not only is the book out there, and I've had a chance to, I love a great method deck, and I've had my cards splayed out and kind of playing around. So this is another way, if you do have a team, even by yourself, the Wonder Rigor lives in a deck such as this. And I think we've touched on Wonder and Rigor and the greatness of that toggling. So can we just move on to the next? Because I want to make sure, and this one we can build on, because we've heard it before. We've touched on it earlier today. But Natalie and I have talked quite a bit about, Warren Berger and the beautiful question. And I had to include this today as ask a better friggin question. Love that. But if you could just speak to that idea of the beautiful question, and how, in my own experience, sometimes particularly people newer to the business of maybe a creative agency want to come into the room with a great answer. I can't wait to tell people my answer, when I think we know over time, people walking into the room with a provocative question can do more good than coming in with an idea that they baked up. So can you talk a little bit about beautiful question?
Yes. This stems from us being influenced by the work of Warren Berger. And it actually is bringing us back to a place that we all started out as children. It's the way we learned about the world around us. It's the way that we explored. And it's something that we have to ignite, that we have to reward, that we have to not squash, but pause. I often give the example that once upon a time, there was someone who said, what if we could fuel cars by plugging them into an electric socket instead of using petrol? And some people laughed that individual out the room or walked away. And other people leaned in and said, that's kind of interesting. Tell me more. I'd like to work on that with you. And, that's Elon Musk. But as we know, there are a lot of other people who are experimenting with electric cars. Elon Musk was really good at monetizing it and scaling it. But that's an example, right, of an invention converted into value that started with a person who dared to ask a different question. And keep in mind, sometimes the question that you frame, it's not that it's like that zany and original. Sometimes it's repeating something, it's revisiting something that we have assumed by asking why. So why do we do it that way again? When you force each other to really articulate and explain why we've been doing it, you realize, you kind of pause in the middle of your own explanations, and you're like, well, that made sense 5 years ago or a year ago or 3 months ago. Is that still going to make sense now? I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
My husband is an attorney. John is a lawyer. He works for a pretty straight-laced, white shoe law firm. And I say about a month into COVID-19 and cocooning and quarantining at home, they were already starting to ask, so why do we have all this real estate, right? If we seem to be serving our clients, doing our work, connecting through these virtual platforms, what if we went to a hybrid way of working once we get through COVID, right? So, yes. And he honestly did not think his firm would ever really challenge the status quo in that way, but the head of the firm went there, and it's refreshing. It's a really cool way to lead.
Which ties in really well. There's a couple questions that have come in, and one particularly dovetails into what you were saying. And the question's from Jess, which is, do you think the normal 9-to-5 work grind is conducive to creativity? How can workplaces enable their employees to better activate their creativity? And if I could tag on to that, to ask you to respond, I just had this conversation yesterday about now the tendency to just continue to have Zoom meetings an entire day. From meeting to meeting to meeting. And what we talked about last night was where's the think time? Is that from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m.? In this case, that's what the question was. But to go back to the question, with this grind right now, what's happening, how can workplaces enable employees to activate and I would say sustain creativity within the organization?
Workplaces have to draw the boundaries.
Nice.
Leadership has to draw the lines, and they have to say, we are committed to that we will have meetings from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. And that goes for our clients, that goes for internally, and we adhere to that. It can't be, you can't start to have creeping outside of those boundaries. You actually have to stick to it. And I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of this company, but I've just finished reading an amazing book called Essentialism by Greg McKeown, and I highly recommend it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And
Greg McGowan.
Say it again?
Greg McGowan.
Oh, I'm sorry. I apologize. Greg McGowan. Excuse me.
Yeah.
But he gives an example because he's just talking about in essentialism, do what matters. Like edit out the fluff and the rest, which also means focusing on time. And he gives an example of a company that carved out a specific amount of time only to have meetings. And and people's first fear was, oh no, but what if the client needs to meet at blah, blah time outside? Mm-hmm. And they said, nope, this is our time. And what did they find? Kind of like when parents hold children to certain boundaries, clients fell in line. They're like, okay, all right, we'll have to pick this up tomorrow. And they stuck to it. And you would be surprised. People respect boundaries. That's another thing that is a really important takeaway about creativity, which is what I'm getting at when I talk about wonder and rigor. Mm-hmm. Creativity is a chaotic system. It has both chaos and order. Chaos, in my view, is that wonder piece, and the order I reflected through the rigor. But we need the boundaries and the constraints so we can push against them to explore a bit. But creativity is not doing whatever you feel like. You need the minimal structures and the order. You know, Twyla Tharp, the famous American modern dancer, mm-hmm. Said that before you can think out of a box, you have to start with a box. So that's kind of what I'm getting at there.
Yeah. That's awesome. Can we move on to the next? Because I think it sets up great. One of the other questions here, and Connor asks, what's the one thing a non-creative can do to strengthen their creative muscles? And I want to tie that in with a question I want to ask you. I know in the book, and for anyone who jumps into the book, there's some great exercises that lets you get a toe in the water and do something rather than just think about doing something. So are there any favorite creative exercises that maybe someone who's considered themselves maybe non-creative could get a taste of it and start to work it out in their own minds to become a little bit more creative by way of an exercise? Because exercises are fun. It doesn't feel like I'm doing anything so important or I'm changing the way I do anything. It's just what a cool prompt to stretch. So are there any exercises in the book that you like particularly, or maybe other people have talked to you about?
Yes. So first of all, to the person who asked that question, in my view, there are not non-creatives. There's just people who are not exercising their creativity to the extent that they could be, right? We all have the capacity for creativity, but some of the things that you can do, because it was important for me in the book to think and do, to be provocative in what the ideas I was putting up, but also give you really practical things you could start doing immediately at the end of each chapter. And so, I mean, I'll go to one of our go-to favorites, Gary, doodle. And if you could draw a dot, a line, a circle, a straight line arrow, a squiggly line arrow, a smiling stick figure person, a Venn diagram, 3 circles, you can do this. And put a timer on. I love timed activities that are like 90 seconds. Which, by the way, if you don't consider yourself a good doodler, 90 seconds will feel painful initially. It doesn't seem like a lot of time, but it's gonna out. So baby steps. 90 seconds every morning. Just let your brain marinate and just doodle. I mean, based on something you see in front of you, try to do a contour line drawing might be advanced, but doodle, stick figures, circles, squiggly lines, patterns. Just try to, like, as we were talking, I just kind of did a visualization of an idea that popped into my head based on what we're talking about. That's a doodle, right? And the cool thing about doodling, especially when you start doing more in a group, is that she who holds the Sharpie gets the deal done, gets the negotiation done, and gets the buy-in, right? And also, you don't be stupid asking a question about someone's doodle. You're like, wait, what is that there? What did you mean by that? And it just starts a conversation. The other thing is, I mean, we're not driving as much and going to work as much, but like, get lost a little bit more. Rewire your neural pathways. Don't take the same way to the grocery store, right? You'd be amazed at what it is. And this is something I learned from the great FBI negotiator, Chris Voss. I'm taking his masterclass right now. And he loves to have people start with their hands in a fist. And then he asks you to put one thumb up in one hand and your index finger out in the other. And then to switch it and switch it. Let's all try to do that. Just hands and fists. Gary, you too.
Oh, okay.
Put your right thumb up.
Yes.
And put your left index finger out. Now switch. And switch again.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
But, I mean, this comes at a time when I was just mastering the patting the head, rubbing the feet.
I know. But you know, what we just did, it was the beginning of new habit formations, new neural pathways. So getting lost, doodling, daydreaming, I've already talked about. Those are itty bitty baby steps.
I love them, and hopefully it gives Connor some room to run, and others who are thinking that. I want to move on to the next. I forget what the next slide was, but great. And I think we've been doing some questions, and I could just see by the clock on my computer, we're running close to our time. So I want to do this. If we can just move on to the next slide, if we could, very briefly, because I want to go back and talk about the offer and remind people who might have jumped on what they can do to have a chance of getting the signed copy. But throughout the book, but towards the latter or end of the book, you really put a stake in the ground and say, really, creativity is how we leap forward. And I think now, in the past few months, that's even more profound. So how can people use this statement to put themselves moving in the right direction?
I think there's huge opportunities now to redesign our relationship with time, create new rituals, and your work. We kind of have to, so that every day doesn't feel like Groundhog Day. These are huge opportunities to practice creative abrasion. That's a term that I'll just forget his first name, but Mr. Hirschberg, who was the head of design for Nissan Automotive International, he would purposely create teams that were cognitively diverse. People who came from sales and manufacturing and finance, and HR would also help on a design project. So you have an opportunity now. You're not limited by geography. You can reach out to people, right, whose TED Talk you just watched or whose webinar you just checked out, and ask to partner with them on projects and to ask their approach to things, right? So and even when I think about the social justice protests that are going on in the United States, the way that we're going to get through this messiness is through creativity, because creativity loves mess, because creativity is messy.
It's an inherent part of the process.
It's part of the process. We have to, one of the points I reference in the book is I really love this podcast called Hello Monday. Okay. It's a podcast that LinkedIn puts out. And there was an interview that Jessie Hempel does. She's the host with Laura Linney, the actress who's on Ozark.
Yeah.
And there's a point where Laura Linney just points out that actors are really good at sitting with discomfort. If we think about how creativity has been ghettoized in the arts, and now we're going to extrapolate from that, and we're all going to exercise our creativity, we need to get better at sitting with the discomfort. And creativity, wonder, and rigor, the 3 I's, are all ways we can sit with the discomfort so that we can leap forward.
I love it, and Natalie, this has been great, and as I'm sure several other people that are on yet could go for hours on this, because I would just love where Creative Leap is now taking us, and some of the color and dimension you've added. But I want to ask people again to text Create, follow what we're seeing here, because I would love for others to get the book in their hands and start joining this conversation, even with their own team or family members, friends. And
the debt.
To take advantage of this. So we'll do that. Otherwise, I think, that's a reminder, but the last slide, if we have that, some call to action, because this is sort of an ongoing conversation, very much so. And I want to direct people to maybe take some action from today. So can we just go to the very, very last slide? And the book, Amazon, please go there and jump into it and get your head wrapped around a lot of what's going on. And I think it's great as well. Natalie talked about a YouTube channel. People can access it like right now.
Yes.
And that's the beauty of it, is that Natalie's put out a lot of the things we touched on today and way more. So you can access that. And to go back to the original premise of purpose, if there's some interest and you have a team wanting to do what we're describing here as a purpose first workshop, there's ways to schedule that, but we don't want this conversation with all of you to end after this hour. Here's some things to do, but otherwise, Natalie, can't thank you enough, and I hope once things start to rise, we can share a stoop in Philly and chat again. And
yes,
doodle.
Well, Gary, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for sharing your platform. Thanks, 29, and this was a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
Good.
Thank you,
and congratulations on the week and the weeks ahead.
Thank you.
And have an awesome weekend. Thanks.
Have a good weekend. Bye.
See you guys.